We're just waiting, I think, for Ms. Chandler to arrive, final panel member. And there she is. Good morning and welcome to this online hearing of the Committee of Adjustment of the City of Ottawa under the Planning Act. This video conference is also live streaming on YouTube. With me are my fellow panel members, Jocelyn Chandler, Stephen Lewis, Terrence Otto, and Martin Vervoort. My name is Fabian Poulam, and I will be chairing this hearing today. The procedure for this hearing will be as follows. Listed on the agenda and appearing on the screen are applications we will hear today. For the sake of efficiency, the committee may deal with agenda items in a different order. Committee members have reviewed the planning reports and any written submissions in support or in opposition of each application. Today, we will hear oral submissions from any interested party. Notice regarding minor variance applications, notwithstanding pre-consultation with city staff, is the responsibility of the applicant to identify all required variances accurately on the application to 1, add a new variance or to increase the extent of the variance requested. Must be given in accordance with the Planning Act and may require the application to be recirculated for the next hearing date at a cost to the applicant at the prescribed fee. If an applicant amends their plans with no impact to the variances or to reduce the variances requested, recirculation may not be required. As part of the statutory public notification requirements, each applicant was required to post a sign on the property and file a statutory declaration confirming the sign posting. This declaration must be on file today before we can hear the application. Without it, I may have to adjourn the application or administer an oath if necessary. Can the coordinator confirm that we have received all statutory declarations?
Mr. Chair, we have not received any statutory declarations.
Thank you, Madam Coordinator. I will administer the oaths to each applicant. The committee may ask for a brief presentation of the application, followed by questions from members and submissions from the public. Please address your comments to the chair, starting with your name and spelling it if necessary, and your municipal address for the record. Committee limits presentations to 5 minutes. Any exceptions will be at the chair's discretion. And before we begin, we have 2 items to address. Does any member present need to declare an interest in any of the applications that are before us today or that are on the agenda of another committee panel? I believe we have 2 persons. Ms. Chandler, you have an application or 2?
Application, it's item number 5 on our agenda, B-00221 and 222. And item number 10, B-186 and 187.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. I also have to declare an interest in application number 8, D08-01-21. And finally, we don't have any minutes to adopt from previous meetings. We will now hear the application scheduled for this hearing, and we'll deal firstly with items that may be adjourned. Is there anyone present who wishes to request an adjournment of one of the applications scheduled for this hearing? And I believe we have 1, 2, 3, 4 so far that we have requests for adjournment. Item number 5. Madam Coordinator, can you just mute Ms. Chandler or excuse her for the time being, as I believe that's one of the ones that she has as a conflict. Thank you. So Ms. Zander, are you available?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning,
Good.
Ms. Zander.
Thank you. There's a little blip while I join.
So are you in agreement with the request by the planning department for an adjournment today?
Yes, I've discussed with my clients. We do have a little bit more information to provide regarding the environmental impact study and also some comments that were received from neighbors. Our preference would be to not adjourn sine die, and I've discussed with my clients. We're confident we can submit the required information back to staff by the end of September. So hoping the committee would reschedule us. I think it's October 20th for your second hearing in October.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Harrigan if you've got any comments with respect to the adjournment. and the date requested by Ms. Zander.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning department has no concerns with an October 20th adjournment date. However, I would like to echo that we would require the revised environmental impact statement by the end of the month to allow us time to review it adequately.
Ms. Zander, are you able to prepare the documents or the required information for planning by that time?
Yes, the project biologist indicates he can meet that timeline. So that will be our plan. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to ask the panel now if they would be, if they're willing to adjourn this application to October the 20th. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Your application is adjourned to October the 20th. Thank you, Ms. Zander.
Great, thank you.
And we'll move on to adjournment request on application number 9. I think it is Ms. Zander again.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 9, that's the one on Stagecoach Road.
Correct.
So we, as you know, have adjourned this several times. We have provided additional information. I think we're close to resolving this, but would like a bit more time to discuss with your staff. And again, our target would be to submit revised reports by the end of September. So I would ask if the committee would consider the same adjournment date to October 20th.
Okay. Mr. Gordon, are you available to comment on behalf of the city? Are you in agreement with an adjournment to October the 20th?
Yes, Mr. Chair, planning is agreeable to that adjournment.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel to adjourn this application to October the 20th. All those in favor, please raise your hands. The application is adjourned to October the 20th. Ms. Zander, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I think I have one more adjournment request.
I think that's true too. Number 10, having to do with 7665 Bleaks Road.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This application, my client and I would request that the committee consider this in your hearing today. I have information. The technical consultant who prepared the mineral resource impact assessment is queued up to speak to the committee as well. This has already been adjourned several times. We would like the committee to discuss this one today, please.
Okay. And Mr. Harrigan, you make a comment. Are you prepared to discuss this today?
Thank you. We are prepared to discuss this today, but we would request an adjournment to have a revised revised mineral resource impact assessment provided to us.
Okay, and if not, if we do hear this today, the conditions that were on the previous adjournment from August the 18th are those that you'd be considering as it being appropriate today?
We would request those conditions with the exception of condition number 7, the gradage and drainage plan that can be removed after further conversations with the engineering department.
Okay. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel if they would like to hear this application today. I believe that it's, so all in favor of hearing it today, please raise your hands. So your application will be heard today. Thank you, Ms. Zander.
Okay, thank you.
And one last item is item number 8, having to do with 135 Heather Street. And I have to be excused from this one. Please excuse me, Madam Coordinator. Mr. Vervoort, would you take over?
Certainly, I can do that. I just wondered if Mr. Pierce is here, or I see Mr. Chow. Are you the agent, Mr. Chow, on this application now?
It would be myself.
Pardon me?
It would be myself, Taylor West.
Oh, Mr. West. Okay, thank you. So I understand that there's a further adjournment request on this. This has already been adjourned, I think 3 times previously. Do we have a proposed date in mind for the adjournment?
We are hoping for the first meeting of October, which I believe is the 6th, if that's still available.
Okay. And what information remains outstanding that has to be provided? Because we don't want to adjourn another time again.
No, we understood. We've had discussions with municipal staff to identify 3 options to provide access, to the landlocked parcel. And now we're just meeting with our client and the prospective purchaser of the lands to ensure everyone's okay with the means to access it. So unfortunately, we needed just a little bit more time.
Okay, Mr. Gordon, any comments on the adjournment request and the proposed date of October 6th?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff haven't really been provided with much information on what is proposed to come forward. So I would have to take Mr. West's word that they believe they can have a way forward by that date. I don't have any way to assess that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we will be following up with Mr. Gordon probably before the end of the week in terms of the path forward, and the October 6th date gives us 5 weeks to resolve this.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from members of the committee? If not, I would ask then for approval of the adjournment of this application to our hearing of October 6th. All those in favor? So the application is adjourned to October 6th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I'll turn everything back over to our chair, Mr. Poulet.
All right, so we'll begin now, starting at the top of the agenda with application number 1, having to do with 470 Big Horn Way. Matthew Mulvihill, are you available? You're muted, Mr. Mulvihill. There we go.
Morning.
Good morning. I would like to administer an oath concerning the signposting on your property. Can you take that oath today?
Yes, I can.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, as instructed, and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes. Yep, I swear.
Okay, please proceed with a brief description of your application today.
So yeah, what I've proposed is basically severing some land from 470 Bighorn Way and adding it to my property, which is right beside it, being 450 Bighorn Way. The reason I'm doing so is just that just to make things right. I've talked to my sister-in-law, who is my neighbor and who is the property owner of 470 Bighorn Way. And as I said in my application, basically it's just to make things right. I've been maintaining this property pretty much ever since I've been here. The laneway itself is a right-of-way, but I'm the only one who's been using it since I've been here for 18 years. So just to make things legal and correct, and I just wanted to sever the correct area just to make it my own, and just for future reference, just to, if I decide to do other things to maintain it, not to build anything on it, but just to maybe plant trees or just basic property maintenance, just improving my property.
Okay. Are you familiar with the conditions that planning is requesting?
The conditions, I have not. Well, the only conditions I know, if it is approved, I do have to get a new severance and get it legally surveyed going forward. It's
just standard condition 5012 for a lot line adjustment. There is one other condition they're requesting, is that you have independent services on your property. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So now I'll move on to Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Harrigan, can you provide some information for the panel?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning department has no concerns with this application, subject to the conditions included. This is a standard lot line adjustment to kind of legally recognize the existing driveway, the fenced area, the accessory structures and sheds, and a little bit of the septic bed as well too. So it's from the planning's perspective, this is a legal reason for a lot line adjustment.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. I'd like to ask our conservation partners if they have any comments to make at this time.
We have no concerns with the application. It is actually located beyond the Conservation Authority's watershed, but we reviewed it from an advisory perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Ogden. I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this I'd like to ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Mr. Vervoort?
Just with respect to condition 2, it refers to storm sanitary and water services. I think probably it should just be clarified to indicate the location of the well and the septic. Maybe is that more appropriate? That's a question for Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the storm sewer, we would like to ensure that their storm outlet is legal and on property, and they are not putting any excess flooding onto the neighbor's property, just in case that there was any shared storm sewers running or drainage running along the existing driveway. We just want to make sure that each property has their own legal outlets for stormwater.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Otto, any questions or comments? You're muted, Mr. Otto. I think I read your lips. It said no questions. Okay. Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments?
None, thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
None. I support the application.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel now for approval of this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Mulvihill.
Okay, thank you, guys.
On to application number 2, having to do with 6709 Waterloo Street. Mr. Beaudry is the agent on file. Mr. Beaudry, are you available?
Yes, I am available.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee.
I would like to see if you can take this oath for the signposting on your property.
I can actually shift my computer to the left and show you the sign outside of my office.
Well, that's okay. We just need to know that it's been on site for 14 days. Do you
Yes,
solemnly swear? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I solemnly swear.
Thank you very much. Please proceed with the brief discussion of your application.
Thank you. So we're here today to seek approval of my 2 applications to discharge portions of my property, which is 6709 Waterloo Street to 6689 Rideau Street North and 6713 Waterloo Street. These are my neighbors who are adjacent to me. So just looking to convey portions of my property by way of lot line adjustment.
Thank you very much. And you're aware of the 2 conditions that planning is requesting?
I received 2 conditions from planning last night. If you could please refresh me on them just to ensure that I have my marching orders correct.
Sure. Mr. Gordon, would you please provide that information to Mr. Beaudry? Mr. Gordon.
Yes. The first is that basically that the 3 separate pins for the properties that make up the property from which the land is being taken, which is 709 Waterloo Street. Those will need to be merged into one parcel. The second is the standard lot line adjustment condition.
Thank you. Now, can you please comment on behalf of the city with respect to this application?
Yes, the planning department has no concerns with the application, subject to those conditions contained in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
None.
Ms. Chandler?
Sometimes the space bar works and sometimes it doesn't. I don't have anything further to ask.
Thank you. Mr. Otto? Reading your lips once again. Okay, I can read your lips. It's like you said, no comments. Mr. Lewis?
No, I'm still good.
Good. Mr. Vervoort?
No comments, questions, or concerns.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved, Mr. Beaudry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Welcome. Now we're moving on to application number 3, having to do with 4284 Cambrian Road West. Mr. Wagar, are you available?
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Wagar. I would like to administer an oath concerning the signposting on your property. Can you take that oath today?
I can.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
Yes,
Swear?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please proceed with providing us with a brief description of your application today.
Thank you. I do have a presentation, so I'll just ask the coordinator to put up slide 2. Perfect, you've got it. Okay, so I'm before the committee today on behalf of my client, which is Hydro Ottawa Limited, and it's for a proposed severance of their property, which is located at 4284 Cambrian Road West. Now, the purpose of this requested consent is to sever off excess land from a newly constructed municipal transformer station. And as you'll see on this slide here that we have up, the site is located southwest of Barrhaven and Highway 416, and it's situated on the north side of Cambrian Road West. Surrounding the site is a number of heavy industrial type land uses, to the south being the Trail Road landfill, and then to the west or northwest, a number of aggregate operations. If you could turn to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the submitted draft reference plan that we have here identifies the lands to be retained as parts 4 and 5, and the lands to be severed as parts 1 to 3. Now, the lands to be retained, these consist of the municipal transformer station, and this was constructed as part of the Power South Nepean project. And this project began in 2016 with the purpose of building new infrastructure to meet the current and future needs of the South Nepean community. Now, the lands to be severed, these consist of a naturalized pollination meadow and a tree lot. The trees in the meadow were planted in partnership with the Rideau Valley Conservation Foundation, and the intent of it was to naturalize the land with new habitat as part of compensation for the new transformer station. If you could turn to the next slide, please. The land uses are defined as a public utility and as an agricultural use. And together with the configuration of the proposed severance, the application fully conforms and complies to applicable official plan policies and the zoning bylaw regulations. So in closing, it's our opinion that the proposed severance represents good land use planning and that it's in the public interest and has regard for Section 5124 of the Planning Act. And as such, we recommend the consent be granted by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you aware of the 3 conditions that planning is requesting for this application?
Yes, we are aware of the conditions, and with respect to the parkland dedication condition, we would ask the committee to consider waiving this condition. And the reason behind this is that the one of the other conditions is for the severed land to be rezoned to prohibit sensitive land uses. So this would include residential and some limited other uses, which would require well water. Essentially, this sanitizes the land from any development. And the whole purpose of a parkland dedication is to ensure that new development, provides funding to account for that growth to the parkland dedication fund. So In our view, if the land isn't going to be able to be developed and it's currently under agreements to remain as a tree lot and a pollination meadow, then there should be no need for the parkland dedication or cash in lieu of that.
Thank you. Mr. Harrigan, comments on behalf of the city, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning department has no concerns with this application, subject to the 3 conditions. Regarding the parkland dedication, development is classified as severance and creating a new lot on there. And as such, it does fall underneath the parkland dedication bylaw. So as such, we would request that the parkland dedication be included within this, as a condition, be included within this application.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. I'd like to ask the committee for their comments. Mr. Vervoort, any questions or comments?
I think for the parkland dedication, probably we could just add the wording if required, and then Hydro Ottawa can have their discussion as to whether or not the bylaw applies in this particular circumstance, but otherwise I'm fine with the application.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
Just a question on the parkland thing. I have no problem with the application, but when we sever off a surplus farm dwelling to another farmer, the land is zoned agriculture, can't be built on. So there's usually not a cash in lieu, I don't believe. So if there's nothing going to be built, why would we need a cash in lieu? Is that land stagnated or whatever the right word is from building in the future? If it is, I don't see a need for it.
Mr. Harrigan?
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Through you, Mr. Chair, most of the development on there is prohibited, and all sensitive land use development will be prohibited as well too. There may be options in the future. So the planning department would be agreeable with Mr. Brevort's option to say if required for parkland dedication, and that will allow us to have a further conversation with the legal department and interpretation of the parkland dedication bylaw, just to make sure that we are following the rules in play.
Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, I guess.
Okay. Mr. Otto, any comments? You're muted. There you
hear
go.
me?
Yep, I can.
Well, finally. Yes, I have one comment in regards to, I believe there's a minimum lot size when it applies to severances in the rural area, and this doesn't really qualify for that. That's one question. And I guess the question to the owners is, if this land is going to be basically sterilized, why would you go through the expense of severing it in the first place? Why not just maintain it and as is, as your natural pollination site and woodland?
Okay, so we'll go with Mr. Harrigan for the first question. Mr. Harrigan?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the policy, the minimum lot size requirement is under section 3.7.2 sub-policy 10, and that is intended for residential purposes. So the minimum size retained 10 hectares and the minimum severed size has to be 0.8 hectares, and that is for residential purposes. Because this size requirement of the current lot cannot meet the minimum lot size requirements for residential severance, we've asked that the rezoning condition prohibit any residential development.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett, Mr. Wager, do you have any comments with respect to the second question?
I do. So the main purpose for that is simply that Hydro Ottawa doesn't require excess land that isn't actually being used for their infrastructure. So the purpose to sever that off is so that it can be transferred outside of their operating company, which they have certain obligations for. So one of which would be to not hold excess land which is not being used for their infrastructure. They went through an extensive process dating back starting in 2016 for this project as part of a much larger one to bring power into this area and for future needs with development in the area to the northeast of Highway 416. And through that, they had to go through provincial environmental approvals. And with that, there was compensation to be provided in the form of the pollination meadow and the tree lot. And just back to the parkland question, again, the rationale that the city has provided seems to weigh on the fact that there would not be quality well water on this land due to the landfill in proximity. Understanding that, again, this essentially sterilizes the land, and as will a rezoning of the land. And if the city wishes in the future, if this land ever were to be developed, they would have another opportunity to seek parkland dedication at that time. So again, we respectfully request that it be waived at this time.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions, Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, I think it was Terry, but
Sorry.
I'm still starting to think and that we don't need that cash in lieu at all. Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Otto, did that answer your questions?
More or less. So in regards to residential, but what happens, can that then be developed later on as a piece of commercial land? Because if it is sterilized, who's going to buy it?
Well, ultimately, things change, right? So in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the situation might be different. The landfill might be at a different stage in its life cycle, as would the surrounding aggregate operations. And perhaps that land might be available for development at that time. But in any event, it would likely require other planning approvals, such as rezoning, site plan control approval. All of those are opportunities where the city can seek parkland dedication. And so at this time, especially if the land is to be rezoned as a condition to prohibit land uses, the land will be sterilized for the immediate future. So we're not removing an opportunity for the city to go back later and get that parkland dedication, which is intended to reflect growth and development. That's what that parkland dedication is for. And we are not growing or developing that land to be severed.
Thank you. That answer your questions there, Mr. Otto?
Well, more or less. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lewis, I'll get back to you. I apologize. Any comments?
No, I've said all I need to say. It's just if you do the parkland dedication to talks later on, it certainly reduces Hydro's leverage with the city. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments?
Going down the same road with more questions. Okay, the zoning that's being proposed on what will be the vacant land, the naturalized land, is it the same as what we do when we have agricultural land left over after a surplus farm dwelling is severed, like it basically restricts all development? Or what is the proposed zone on this property?
Mr. Harrigan?
Thank you. So you, Mr. Chair, the specific zone that would be applied after the rezoning application would be determined through the formal application process, what would be the most appropriate zone for that. It's not quite exactly the same as a surplus farmhouse dwelling severance. Just in regards to this rezoning, it is meant to prohibit residential development because it doesn't meet the official plan requirements for a residential severance. And then is meant to prohibit any sensitive land use, primarily that relies on well water, just because of contamination concerns from the neighboring landfill and also the mineral resource that's neighboring as well too. So this rezoning would prohibit all forms of sensitive land use. Not sure if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, it doesn't prohibit light industrial or commercial types development, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would still be under the current RU zoning with exceptions or a certain variation of that. So right now under the current RU, light industrial is not a permitted use, same as commercial uses. So those uses would not be entered into it. That would be more of a restriction of the current uses that are allowed. No new uses would be allowed or entered into there. So under the current use, no light industrial commercial uses are permitted.
Okay, and I have never seen a parkland dedication through a zoning bylaw amendment. Is that possible?
That is not something we normally do, no.
Yeah, my feeling on this, although I have to wonder how this site who's going to acquire this site that has an agreement for naturalization on it, is that this is the opportunity that the city would normally take to acquire parkland dedication. And I would support continuing with that condition because I don't foresee another opportunity for that to happen. And this is development That would be my position on this.
Thank you. Mr. Wager?
So to that point, yes, it's not required for rezoning. However, it would be required or could be required through the site plan control process. And any development which would happen on this site is almost guaranteed to have to go through that process, other than certain uses such as perhaps maybe a tree lot. So essentially, the land will be sterilized. It has a very limited set of permitted land uses as exists today. Residential will be removed. Removing anything which relates to well water, well, there's only so many uses which can exist without well water. It's not many, and this area is on private services. So again, I don't foresee there being a missed opportunity here by the city. I think if this land ever were to be redeveloped, it would be well down the road, 30, 40 years from now. And there would be opportunity at that time through site plan control.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Chandler.
But just to that point, the opportunity for the city to take parkland dedication is now 30, 40 years down the road. It's the administration of things like that and checking to see what happened in the past is extremely difficult, as we've probably all discovered over the past 20 years. That doesn't really change my position on that condition. I think that's a standard requirement with the city, and I don't see an exemption here.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to then ask the committee to first consider approving this application with the condition number 2, as Mr. Revort has proposed, that if it is required, that condition would be required. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel if they would approve this application with that amendment to condition number 2. All those in favor, please raise your hands. So, Mr. Otto, did you raise your hand? No. Mr. Lewis, did you raise your hand?
I did, but I just see there's something missing here. Okay, go ahead. I'll figure it out. Too late.
Okay, so I also would approve this application based on Mr. Revort's request for those additional words. So to that end, your application is approved, Mr. Wager, with those 3 conditions and condition number 2, if required. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to application number 4. Mr. Price, this is having to do with 2365 Ashton Station Road. Mr. Price, are you available?
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Rod Price on behalf of the owner of 2365 Ashton Station Road.
Are you available to take the oath for the signposting?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
Yes,
You
Mr.
swear?
Chair, I swear. Yes.
Would you please provide us with a brief description of your application today?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you today, we have a couple of severances in the rural area out on the existing address is 2365 Ashton Station Road. Part 1 on the sketch that was provided as part of the application is to propose a new lot of 66,000 plus or minus square meters in size. Have a frontage of 221 meters on Ashton side road and a depth of about 300 meters. It's the intention of the owner to convey this parcel to a family member, the owner's son, to build a new house. Part 2, which is does require a minor housekeeping item in terms of the notice that was provided, as well as in the staff report. In the notice that went out to the public, Part 2 is identified as a proposed severed, which is true. All the frontage and area of 350 square meters or 350 meters of frontage, 107,000 square meters of area is all correct. However, if you were to go through the application and the cover letter, Part 2 is the existing home on the property, which the owner will retain. We just want to make sure that the address at 2365 remains with that house so that the owner doesn't have to change all their pertinent information, banking, licenses, that type of thing. And part 3 will be the remnant parcel, about 790 meters of frontage along Ashton Station, about 308 along McClinton, and an area of 245,000 square meters. And EIS has been provided by Muncaster Environmental that outlines development envelopes, which the owner agrees to adhere to. Have gone through the staff report, have a question on condition number 2, I believe it is, in terms of, seems to be a new condition that's added to rural severances here, that the existing parcel has its own independent storm, sanitary, and water services, and that these services do not cross the proposed severance line. Not sure if that was intended for more suburban or urban development. It seems like it is. So maybe just a little bit of clarification on that one. Condition 5, that the owner provide a slope stability report. Again, it's a new condition that's crept into a lot of these rural severances. The size of these lots being provided are huge. It's probably best that any geotech be provided at the building permit stage. Slope stability, it's a flat piece of land out in Ashton Station Road, and it's one of those conditions that may seem minor in nature, but is quite costly to the owner to provide.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Gordon, do you have any comments with respect to this application?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has no concerns with the application, subject to the conditions contained within the report. To clarify, condition number 2 is mostly concerned with drainage to ensure that there is an outlet into a drain and that it's not draining over adjacent property. And the slope stability report, that term probably causes some confusion, but it is to do with organic soils on site. So we would need to verify that the soils are suitable to be built on before the severance is granted.
Okay, thank you very much. And apart from that, the department has no concerns.
Correct.
Okay. I'd now like to ask the conservation partners for any comments they may have with respect to this application.
Yeah, me through the chair, the Conservation Authority. I'll turn my video on since we have it. The Conservation Authority. Oh, I'll just leave it off. The Conservation Authority has reviewed the application, has no objections to the proposed severances. Agreed that the implementation of the EIS be integrated to the decision. I think that's being handled through the conditions. The Conservation Authority did note that there is potential for organic soils in the area, but it wasn't identified specifically in the areas of development. The Conservation Authority provided comments to encourage that future development confirm that there was no organic soils prior to development. And that's typically done through a geotechnical analysis, not necessarily referred to as a slope stability report, at least from the Conservation Authority, how we identify the requirement. But normally it's done through a geotechnical, specifically for investigating organic soils if needed.
Do you think that we should add that condition, Mr. Lalonde?
I didn't request it or require it as part of my formal comments. The information I provided was more of a best practices and encourage the applicant to undertake that for their own interest and comfort, but there wasn't, based on our mapping, the need to request that as a requirement.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd now like to ask the panel for their comments. Ms. Chandler?
I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have comments from Mr. Otto?
No comments. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis? Did we lose Mr. Lewis?
We seem to have lost Mr. Lewis.
Yes, we did. Madam Coordinator, can you see if you can give him a call?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort, any comments?
Should we wait till Mr. Lewis is reconnected?
Yes. Any luck, Madam Coordinator?
No, no luck at all.
Okay. Technological challenges, we're going to have to proceed. We'll just, when Mr. Lewis joins us, regretfully, he won't be able to participate in the vote for this because he didn't hear all the evidence. So, Mr. Vervoort, any questions or comments?
Just for the applicant, for Mr. Price, it seems like condition number 5 shouldn't refer to a slope stability report, but just a simple geotechnical report. Would you have any objection to that if it was corrected?
Absolutely not, through you, Mr. Chair. Again, as committee makes these decisions, the conditions get added as part of the decision, and then the applicants and the owners are left wrestling after the fact to clear the conditions. Bit of a thumb wrestling match with staff, so to speak, sometimes in terms of them taking the condition as a letter of the law. So I would just rather avoid that if possible. Geotech report in terms of suitability within the building envelopes or where the proposed dwellings will be should suffice. Yeah, it would have to be done anyways as part of the building permit submission. So that's not a thing. It's just the add-on that it just makes it clear and concise for both parties moving forward. If we're lucky enough to have this thing approved and move forward to clearing the conditions, it just takes out any opportunity for misinterpretation of what the decision actually was.
Thank you. So I'm fine with the applications. I would just propose that condition 5 be amended to read geotechnical report instead of slope stability report.
Thank you. Seems we have Mr. Lewis back online. Mr. Lewis, do you have any questions or comments about this application?
No, sorry about that. My computer was acting up. No, I'm fine with the application. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application with one amendment presented by Mr. Vervoort, that this condition number 5, slope stability report, would be replaced with a geotechnical report. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved, Mr. Price. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry to jump in. Again, just want to make sure that as per the notice and the staff report, that part 2 on the sketch remains the 2365 Ashton Station Road, just so that the homeowner doesn't have to go and change all their information.
I'd like to ask Mr. The Secretary to confirm that they're not required a recirculation due to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. No, we would not require recirculation. We're dealing with the proposed parcels as part numbers on a plan, and municipal addressing takes care of what they'll be called going forward, although we do provide that for informational purposes only. Having said that, I'm sure it wasn't the intent to change the address of an existing dwelling, so we can confirm that. If Mr. Price wants to send me an email with what the addresses should be, we'll make sure that the decision reflects that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
The owner appreciates that. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay. So with that, this application is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Price. Item number 5 is adjourned. Item number 6. Item number 6 and 7 we'll hear together. Ms. Zander, are you available? This is having to do with 8700 McClinton Road. Good morning again, Ms. Zander.
Good morning.
I would like to administer the oath concerning the sign posting. Can you take that oath today?
I cannot, but I'm hoping my client, Mr. Fries, is on the phone. He was having trouble connecting.
Yes.
Terrific.
Yeah,
Please
I'm here.
to administer the oath. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Fries. Do you solemnly
Morning.
swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Ms. Zander, would you please proceed and give us a brief description of your 2 applications?
Terrific. Yes, thank you. So what you have before you today is an application for consent to create a new lot and a concurrent application for minor variance. The consent for the new lot is to create a 2.5 acre vacant lot for a new residential dwelling. The retained lot, which has the civic address of 8700 McClinton Road, would have the existing dwelling and the outbuildings. The minor variance is for the frontage for the retained lot. It is deficient. Frontage would be just over 42 meters. The frontage for this entire property was surveyed. So we're fairly confident in those dimensions because that was prepared by a land surveyor prior to submission. So the variance is the reduced frontage on the retained lot. There were no natural heritage issues in the proximity of the severed lot or the development area on the retained lot. So there was no requirement for an environmental impact study by city staff. The barn separation calculation, the MDS, was completed, and you can see those influence areas on our sketch that's on the screen at the moment. So there's no concern with the barn separation distance. We can meet all of those requirements. And so the variance would allow for a reduced frontage for the retained lot. While it is undersized, I would have reviewed my planning report with the rationale and the 4 tests, but it's my opinion that that deficient frontage is not out of character with surrounding lots, and it provides access to an existing developed lot, and the development is already set back a fair piece from McClinton Road. So I think that requested variance is in fact minor. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Ms. Zander. Mr. Harrigan, or sorry, before I proceed, Ms. Zander, are you familiar with the 6 conditions of this application?
Yes, we've reviewed the conditions. The condition regarding the grading and drainage plan number 4, again, I'm not sure the need for that on a lot of this size. So I don't know if that's become standard practice of the committee. There's no immediate development plan on the severed lot. So I'm not sure what I would show on a grading and drainage plan without any development plan. So if the committee is open to removing that condition so that that can be addressed at the building permit stage, that would certainly be my preference.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Harrigan, would you please make some comments on behalf of the city?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning department has no concerns with this application, subject to the conditions included within the report. The department would like to note, though, that we are comfortable removing condition number 4 for the gradage and drainage plan after further conversations with the engineering department.
Thank you very much. Any comments on behalf of the panel? Mr. Lewis?
No questions or concerns, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Otto.
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Ms. Chandler?
Nothing additional.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vervoort.
I'm fine with both applications, and I would remove condition 4 then from the severance application.
Thank you very much. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel to approve this application, both applications, the consent application and the minor variance application, by removing condition number 4 out of the 6 conditions. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved, Ms. Zander. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll skip number 8. I think, is that the last one we have? I believe so. So I will excuse myself then and ask Mr. Vervoort to continue on with the hearing today. Thank you all very much for your help.
I believe, Mr. Poulin, we adjourned number 8 already.
That's right.
And then it was number 10 was we were proceeding with.
That's right. Sorry, Ms. Zander, yes, you're still around. Sorry about that. I need to administer the oath for the signposting again, Ms.
So
Zander. Are you
again,
able to take that oath?
I am not, but I'm hoping my client, Mr. Ferranda, is on the call and he should be able to do that.
I saw him earlier.
He's there.
I see him there, but you're muted, Mr. Ferranda.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do swear.
Thank you very much. Ms. Zander, please proceed with the brief application of your, brief summary of your application.
Very good. Sorry, I should have had that in front of me. So the applications before you today are to create 2 new lots that would front to Bleaks Road. Both lots are, one lot's 2 acres and one is about 2 1/4 acres. They're located.
Sorry, I need to interrupt. I have declared a conflict on this, so I need to leave the meeting.
I think you did do that before. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please proceed, Ms. Zander. Thanks.
So the intent is to create 2 lots in the southeast corner of the subject property, 2 acres and 2 1/4 acres or so. The retained lot is about 46 acres in size. There is no existing development on this property. It's vacant at this time. An environmental impact study was prepared and reviewed by city staff, and I believe staff have indicated they're satisfied with that, subject to implementation of some mitigation measures. There was a planning report with aggregate assessment for a nearby aggregate operation prepared and submitted by my office. And subsequent to that, a mineral resource impact assessment technical report prepared by Milestone, Gary McLaren, and I think Gary is available today to comment as well. There is a licensed Class B pit to the southeast of the subject property on the other side of Bleaks Road. So we looked at proximity to that pit, which I think is probably the main issue that's outstanding for staff at this time. The pit area is zoned ME2. Your zoning bylaw requires 150 meter setback to that, and this property far exceeds that setback. The official plan calls for a 300 meter influence area setback from a sand and gravel resource area. So if you look at our severance sketch, you will see the 300 meter distance from the sand and gravel resource area, excuse me, just encroaches onto the corner of one of the lots, but the balance of lot 1 and all of lot 2 are outside of the 300 meter influence area from the sand and gravel resource area as mapped on the city's official plan. In terms of land use compatibility, there are a number of existing residences, sensitive land uses that are already in place that are closer to the pit operation and the sand and gravel resource area than the proposed severed lots. The intervening lands are heavily vegetated, so there's a significant kind of vegetative screen barrier between the pit and the subject property, and the Bleaks Road that runs between the 2 properties. The haul route for the pit operation would be running in an easterly direction away from the subject property. It would not be running through the village of Munster. So in terms of traffic conflicts between the proposed lots and the pit operation, we feel there would not be any traffic conflicts either. So in my opinion, and as supported by the information we've provided, we believe that the creation of these 2 lots does conform with the city's official plan, and that we've demonstrated appropriate compatibility between the 2 land uses. The city, through the development agreement that's going to be required as a condition of the severances, to implement hydrogeology recommendations and natural heritage recommendations, can also include an awareness, a warning clause for lot owners in the future that they are in proximity to an aggregate operation and may be susceptible to noise, odor, and so on. So I think that is a way to make awareness for future property owners of the pit operation. I think that's all I want to say. Gary McLaren's here and I think was registered as a speaker as well. He did the MRIA as a technical expert, and I think it would be valuable for him to provide some comments as well. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And I don't see his name here.
I see his name on my screen, Mr. Chair.
Do you see it? Okay.
Yes.
I see it as Gary's. Okay.
Okay. I guess it's on mute. Is it still
No,
on
you're
mute?
good now.
No,
You're
we're
good
good.
now.
Good. Okay, thank you. Just some context, just as a follow-up to Tracy's comments. I was brought on just prior to the last hearing of these applications by the applicant, just because of my background experience in leading the license application for the Dale Argue site back in the early 90s, and my awareness from an official plan perspective on getting some of the mineral resource areas in the close proximity around the site. At that time, it was just a couple of days before the hearing, and I didn't have the privilege of having site plans and some of the technical information, so it was mostly by memory that I commented on the supplementary report to enhance Ms. Zander's planning report. Since then, I have looked at the site plan in detail for technical aspects and have had a couple of site investigations just to clarify some of those issues. I'd just like to dwell a little bit more on Mr. Harrigan's email of August the 26th and the 3 points that was brought up by the planners. And that's really to deal with the noise attenuation from the adjacent hardwood bush that I mentioned in my report. Since my investigation, I noted that this is a fairly dense coniferous deciduous bush. So the comments from the city on the site having possible noise and dust issues as a result of 6 months of year of no leaves is really not applicable now, because it is a lot of white cedar in this area. In accordance with the zoning bylaw, it's recommending that houses be precluded from 150 meters from legally existing operations. During the time of the license applications, the strip development along Bleaks Road in front of this application were considered, and 150 meter setback roughly was used as the eastern boundary of the pit license to mitigate some of those measures, as well as we know there was no aggregate reserves in that front part of the lot line, and a subsequent home was also built on those lands. So that's not much of an issue there. There is a bit of a conflict, I guess, in terms of the official plan and the 300 meters, which in my opinion really deals with impacts on domestic wells and not noise and dust and other issues related to a pit operation. The most easterly lot of the applicant, the housing envelope appears to be about 180 meters from the license boundary line, which I believe is also the zoning boundary line for the mineral extraction. And based on this being ME2 zone, it does restrict asphalt concrete plants, and the site plan also indicates that crushing equipment's not even required on this site. It's strictly for processing of topsoil and fine sands and those types of things. The second point on the email from Mr. Harrigan speaks to best practices and questions whether the application in the 90s would had similar best practices to what today's measures would be. Yeah, I'm sure as the committee would be aware, best practices do change on an ongoing basis. There's as much advantage to disadvantage to this. Obviously, the processing equipment becomes more noise-worthy and lesser impact. The water and calcium and things that are used for containing dust comes into play, and I don't really see things being less restrictive in terms of best practices. The pit's very low impact is also indicated in that email. That's recognized it's a Class B operation. It was the intent of the license initially was to supply backfill material for building of septic systems and backfilling houses and that type of thing in the local vicinity. It's not high quality material, so therefore it's not a commercial use operation to go to a big cement batch plant like some of the other operations in this vicinity. So it is low impact. There was a comment on prevailing winds also made in my report. Again, the 150 meter influence area that's both reflected for technical reports for noise and dust and the zoning bylaw setbacks. Again, as worst case scenario, such as an open farm field. As I've mentioned, this is a dense coniferous deciduous bush, which further acts to deter noise and dust issues from this particular site. Like I say, I can certainly go through any other planning criteria based on questions the committee or chair may have. But I think this is a kind of a slam dunk in terms of impacts, being a pretty low impact local operation.
Thank you very much. Ms. Zander, have you reviewed the conditions that were on the previous application or this application?
Yes,
and do you
we
accept
have
them? Okay.
Yeah, so I think the discussion about the grading and drainage plan condition number 7, which I think Mr. Harrigan said earlier would be okay to remove. Otherwise, yes, I think we're okay with the conditions as written.
Thank you. Mr. Harrigan, can you please comment on behalf of the city?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe Tony Ferranda does have a question. I'm not sure if you would like to take that question before I proceed.
Go ahead, Sean. You go first.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning department does object to this application. To start with, first off, under section 2.5 of the provincial policy statement, mineral aggregate resources are to be protected for the long-term use. So this is a long-range plan that we have to consider. Specifically under section 2.5.2.4, it says that it must be protected from development and activities that would preclude or hinder expansion or continued use. So we're following through the provincial policy statement here, and in cooperation with that, our official plan and zoning bylaw have implemented 2 policies. Now, I'd like to address those separately just so that there's no confusion to this. The official plan says that any development within 300 meters that's considered sensitive to sand and gravel pit or 500 meters to a quarry is not supported unless it's supported by, the planning department cannot support the creation of new lots unless it's supported by a mineral resource impact assessment. Further to that mark, under that section of the official plan, it states that there is no implied restrictions based on the official plan designation to mineral extraction or its potential expansion. And as a result, the department must count the 300 meter influence area from the edge of the zoning as the real world limit for mineral expansion. And as such, the comments made by Ms. Zander about the 300 meter influence area only taking part of the most easterly severance is incorrect, and the planning department would actually put forward that one of the severances is entirely within the 300 meter influence area, and the other severance is partially within that 300 meter influence area. The zoning bylaw itself that addresses lots that are already in creation and already exist, and they require 150 meter setback from the ME2 zone. So lot creation is a little bit more sensitive and adds more density into the area, and as such, it has a greater setback requirement towards that. Further to the report itself too, there has been 2 mineral resource impact assessments that have been provided to the department. The first one, which was prepared by Ms. Zander, stated that there was a confusion where we calculate the 300 meter influence area, and that has just been commented on. The second comment was that there's existing houses located closer to the pit, and therefore this new proposed residential development will have no negative impacts. The planning department entirely opposes that argument. Instead, we offer that those houses located closer to the pit are a significant risk to the ongoing mineral extraction and any potential expansion. Adding these additional 2 residential developments just further increases that development. Further increases that risk to mineral extraction and potential expansion. So that is the second comment for that. The second MRIA that was provided, mineral resource impact assessment, by the aggregate expert did demonstrate that the pit is low impact, and the department does accept that position. Enough information was provided to state that the pit itself is low impact, but that's not the purpose of mineral resource impact assessment, or nor does it follow in lines with the mineral extraction policies under the provincial policy statement. We are to protect mineral extraction for future use and potential expansion. And they have not demonstrated that these new pits, or these new residential developments have no negative impacts to the potential pits. The comments, the three specific comments, so that was the general position, is that they have not proven that there's no negative impacts to the mineral extraction. Then the department did have three comments specifically, and that was more along the lines that conclusions are being drawn without supporting evidence towards it. So the trees providing noise and dust reduction, that has been addressed recently with saying that they're carnivorous trees and that the branches will be there. However, there's no development restrictions that will prevent tree removal in the future. I know through talking with Ms. Ferranda that they have absolutely no intention of removing any trees through the development process. However, if they choose to sell the lot in the future or circumstances change, there is nothing that prevents the removal of those trees, nor the removals of the trees within the ME2 zone as well too. Furthermore, for that, the prevailing wind comments as well too, there's just no evidence that's shown what calculations does those prevailing winds actually prevent or move dust in a certain direction. I believe that there was maps that may be provided from the nearby airports that show these winds, but staff has not seen them or viewed them, and we cannot definitively state whether that proves that the noise and dust will travel predominantly in the other direction. So in conclusion, both reports have not addressed that there's no negative impacts to the mineral extraction or its potential expansion. And as a result, the department must object to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. Now, Mr. Ferranda, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we have been working for about 6 months, myself and Tracy, closely with Sean, who, we wanted everything to go smoothly. That's why we're working closely and working in conjunction with him. And Sean, by the way, is a really great guy, and he has been a pleasure to work with. We've got through all our issues except this MRIA. Tracy had a planning, in her planning report, we created an MRIA, but that was rejected. We have an expert to come on, an expert who really knows his stuff. Gary has even licensed this pit. He worked with the Ministry of Natural Resources. He gives his technical expertise, which I think is very high. He's got a high bar there, and it's rejected. So we have given everything. Like we've pushed it from the 7th to the 18th of July to the 18th. We pushed it again to the 1st. We're working with the city, and we firmly believe we've given them everything they need. And that's why we don't want to adjourn it again. We want the committee to make a decision, because we firmly believe we have given them everything they need. And as far as the conditions, I mean, if the city, we would prefer that. We think we have done enough for the MRIA, and we would not want condition 1. As for condition 2, that we would enter an agreement with the city of Ottawa that all property owners, current and future, would understand that they're near a licensed pit, and there's potential of noise and dust potential. And we all agree that to that presently and in the future. By the way, I spoke with my neighbor who's directly across the road from the pit. He's been there since 1993. So at the time the pit was created, I asked him his opinion. Do you have any issues with the pit? Does the noise bother you? And he said, absolutely not. I don't even know it's there. So it's just a little, it's gone on a long time here, and we would like to have a decision made on this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'd like to ask our conservation partners if they have any comments to make.
No comments or concerns.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Harrigan. You made a comment that both lots are within the 300 meter influence zone. I see on a document I have that only 1/4 of one, I guess it's severance number 1, is within that 300 meter. You made a comment that both are within the 300 meter influence zone.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify that that 300 meter influence area that you're looking at on the map there is calculated by the official plan designation. And as was stated before, under the official plan section 3.7.4, that the the mineral extraction, there is no implied restriction based on the official plan designation to current or expansion and future operations of mineral extraction. And because of that clause that's in there, the planning department has to calculate the 300-meter influence area by the edge of the zoning, which is the absolute real world edge of the zone of the mineral extraction without having to go through a rezoning application, which would have further considerations towards this. So the department, in conversations with the planner 3 and with the senior engineer for this file, have both calculated the 300-meter influence area from the edge of the ME2 zone.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel if they've got any questions or comments. Mr. Vervoort?
I just want to get some context of the neighborhood here. These houses look like they're pretty close to the edge of the village of Munster. How many other houses are on that road between these proposed lots and the mineral extraction area or the licensed pit? Maybe Ms. Zander can, I don't know if we have an aerial or we have something to show that.
I'm not sure if I can share my screen. I could show you an image. Is that allowed?
Unfortunately, no, only the coordinators can share their screens.
So there's probably a figure in our planning report that shows nearby residences, but there are 3 residences on the north side of Bleaks Road, immediately across from the pit property. There are 3 residences there that would be closer to the licensed area than the proposed severed lots. And there's also a dwelling on the south side of Bleaks Road, which I think falls on the same property as the pit, but it's definitely closer to the pit as well. I would also just like to respectfully disagree with Mr. Harrigan on the official plan policy. Section, is it 37410, clearly says, new development will not be approved within 500 meters of a, in capital letters, bedrock resource area, which is the designation on the official plan schedule, or within 300 meters of a sand and gravel resource area, in capital letters, unless it can be demonstrated that such development will not conflict and so on. So to me, that's very clear that the 300 meters should be measured to the sand and gravel resource area designation as mapped on your plan. Nowhere there does it provide much ambiguity. It doesn't suggest it should be measured to the zone. It's very clear that it's measured from the sand and gravel resource area. And that's exactly what we did on my severance sketch. So the 300-meter setback line that you see on my severance sketch is measured from the boundary of the sand and gravel resource area as mapped on the city's own official plan schedule. That's where we measured it from. That's the way the policy is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, may I make a comment to that remark?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the official plan has to be read in cooperation with the provincial policy statement. And the provincial policy statement clearly says that mineral aggregate operations need to be protected from future development or neighboring activities that would preclude or hinder expansion and continued operation. So that expansion aspect to it is very quite critical to this understanding of our official plan and the policies. And because the official plan policy says there's no, in cooperation with the provincial policy statement, that there's no implied restrictions based on the current official plan designation, we need to take it into the full zone, the full mineral resource zone.
Mr. Chair, if
Yes.
I could add some additional context.
Sure.
I just want to dwell on a couple of points. First of all, the noise and the dust issue. A home is not going to impact the pit from any noise or dust issue because there's provincial guidelines that set parameters for noise and dust, and it has to be contained within the boundary of the licensed area. So if there's visible dust coming from the site, there's an infraction under Environmental Protection Act, and it has to be corrected. And another home is not going to have an impact on that, and or the distance of 150 meters regarding the noise and the dust. Again, it has to, both of those things have to be controlled by the licensee within the confines of the license boundary. And that's well beyond the 150 or 300 meter influence area. the 300-meter zone we're talking about, I've walked around the site significantly, and I have a lot of past experience in official plan designation in this area and the license itself. I can tell you that directly across the road from the applicants, both severances, there is an old abandoned pit that's been completely exhausted right to the boundary of the village limit, which is like a subdivision lot line on the back end. There's a 30-meter wide ridge that runs from that property, from those backyards in that subdivision, that consist of the old pit face that's been sloughed down at a 3-to-1 slope. So there's no more material that can be extracted any further west of the licensed area than what the license presently shows. So there's no sterilization of future reserves anticipated here. And that ridge runs further south along Munster, and there were licenses that have been exhausted and surrendered there as well. So there's absolutely no reserves to be considered in terms of an official plan review. In addition, as I probably alluded to initially, the licensed operation is limited in depth of extraction by both water table and exposure to outcrop bedrock. So this site is only 5 to 6 meters in depth, and therefore there's no vertical expansion of this operation to ever happen as well. So in terms of vertical and horizontal expansion, there's no impact. So I think if the committee can understand that 150 meters is sufficient in terms of the vegetation and the topography and the berms and everything related to how the site would be operated, then there is essentially no impact on noise, dust, or impact on sterilization of future reserves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I make one comment towards that remark?
Absolutely, please proceed.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, that information about exhausting the pit on the western side, the department has received no information about that whatsoever. That is something that could be included with the mineral resource impact assessment to help demonstrate no negative impacts to the pit. The department has received no information whatsoever in writing or otherwise that states that that pit has been exhausted on that side.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Mr. Otto.
No, I think I have a fairly good understanding of what's going on, and I'd like to hear my other members hear something from them as well.
Thank you. Mrs. Chandler, do you have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I believe we may only have a member of our board with us. I believe Ms. Chandler had an interest to declare, and we may have lost Mr. Lewis's connection again.
Okay, well, let's just hang on for a minute. Madam Corder, can you give a try to get a hold of Mr. Lewis? Madam Coordinator, have you been able to reach Mr. Lewis?
No, I have not.
Did you try calling him?
Yes, I did. There was no answer.
Okay. A couple more minutes and then we'll proceed without Mr. Lewis. Ms. Zander and Mr. Ferrand, I'll just wait until Mr. Lewis is confirmed to be with us or not with us before I acknowledge you. One more minute. So I guess Mr. Lewis is not available for us. Before proceeding with the balance of the panel's comments, I'd like to ask Mr. Ferranda if you want to make another comment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's unmuted. Okay, I just forgot to mention when I was speaking earlier, I have absolutely no issue with the pit being there or its future expansion if it were to happen. I spent a lot of time at my property. I've had no issues whatsoever. So like, I just want to put that on record. I'm not trying to preclude the pit from operating or if it were ever to expand. With all the trees and stuff in the way between us and all the other good arguments that were made, even if an expansion were to occur, I believe it'd be no issue. Anyways, I'll leave it.
Thank you. Ms. Zander, you wanted to make another comment?
Thank you. Yes, just briefly with regard to the influence area to the pit, I just want to point out there are a couple of other places in the city's policies that reference 150 meters. The rural policies in the official plan 3749 reference 150 meter influence area from a pit above the water table, which is what this is. So this site is more than 150 meters from the pit above the water table, and the ME2 zone also references 150 meters from a zone boundary to a sensitive land use. So I still respectfully disagree on the 300 meter influence area policy, but also wanted to point out that these two lots are more than 150 meters from the ME2 zone and from the existing pit above the water table, both policies in the city's policy document. So I wanted to just point that out as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may make one comment, sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, again, those are referring to the zoning bylaw themselves, which is recognizing a property that already exists. The property that already exists needs to have the house located 150 meters away. The official plan that policy that we're discussing today is about creating a new lot, and the new lot needs to be 300 meters away or be supported by a mineral resource impact assessment. And as of right now, we have not received a mineral resource impact assessment that demonstrates no negative impacts to the ongoing extraction or potential expansion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vervoort, I'd like to ask for your comments, please.
Yeah, I just had one follow-up question just for Mr. Harrigan. So given that there are other houses in the vicinity, including I think about 3 houses across from the site, how would the creation of these 2 new lots further restrict, I guess, the development of the low impact pit?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the department is of the position that those existing houses that are located closer are a potential threat to ongoing or future expansion of the mineral aggregate resources. And adding additional density into the area just increases that risk. It's kind of the difference between how many people would be petitioning against the pit or making public consultation or remarks like that could potentially prevent the pit from being expanded.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I think we've heard most of the evidence we need, unless anybody else has any questions. And I suggest maybe that we want to reserve on this and discuss this further.
I'd like to get Mr. Otto's comments. He said he wanted to hear from the balance of the group. But I guess we could hear that. We can do that after the meeting. So to that end, I think we're going to reserve this. All those in favor of reserving this judgment on this application, please raise your hands. So we'll reserve, and you'll get your answer today, Ms. Zander and Mr. Ferranda, after we've had an opportunity to discuss it with the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Have a good day.
Thank you.